Jill Valentine. Where has she been? Jill Valentine first appeared in the original Resident Evil game in 1996 and has since become a prominent character in the series, being the main characters of Resident Evil 1, 3, partly shown up in 5, not as the main character but as kind of a prominent side character, and she was also the main character of the spin-off title Resident Evil Revelations. Jill is a former member of the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, also known as STARS, and is known for her combat skills, intelligence, resourcefulness, and being the
master of unlocking.
She has appeared in multiple Resident Evil games, as well as a variety of adaptations, such as films and comics. The last time we saw Jill in a mainline entry was Resident Evil 5 back in 2009, where she wasn't a main character in the story, but she was quite prominent in the story overall, where she was only playable as a mercenaries character, and then a tiny bit into the future, she became playable as a story character in a DLC add-on. A few years after the release of Resident Evil 5, we saw the release of Resident Evil Revelations, which of course was set before Resident Evil 5's events, but it was of course released in the real world after Resident Evil 5, and Jill was the main character of this game as well, alongside Chris Redfield. Following her final appearance in Resident Evil Revelations, we would then see a reference to her in Revelations 2, and since then she has been kept out of the series. As to why this was the case was very ambiguous for the most part. However, the Revelations 2 reference did come in the form of an email for Barry from Jill, evidencing her undergoing a multitude of tests off the back of her brain-controlled activities when under the control of Albert Wesker. It is pretty clear that this email, while it doesn't have a timestamp, was sent quite shortly after the events of Resident Evil 5, as she does reference that she's just got back from Africa, so it's pretty safe to assume that of course the email, while it doesn't have the timestamp, was sent shortly after the events of Resident Evil 5. And that was pretty much the final time we heard or saw of Jill Valentine, until recently, where Capcom have finally revealed the trailer to the new CG movie that's been in development, Resident Evil Death Island, with Jill Valentine finally being a main character once again. And surprisingly, she is not alone. There is also Leon, Chris and Rebecca also taking the limelight alongside her, which is extremely cool to see. We do see that Leon and Jill get a lot of interaction, which is absolutely insane. There is a lot of fan service in this movie from the looks of it, judging by the trailer alone. Chris and Rebecca do reference how Jill has been off screen for so long, and they do hint to how she's pretty much just blaming herself for what damage she's done while she was brain controlled. And of course Chris and Rebecca do suggest how they've not really been holding it against her, but she has been holding herself to blame. So that is probably a key reason as to why we haven't seen her. It's likely that Jill has just been keeping to herself for the most part, as she just doesn't want to do any more damage. She's probably been very traumatized from the events of Resident Evil 5, because she did have a massive impact in the story, and a lot of the events that did take place were as a result of her doing damage while Wesker had her brain controlled when she was working alongside Irving. So it's understandable why she's in this state, but regardless, it is extremely cool to finally see her in a mainline, or I should say in a CG movie, but with the other mainline characters, as of course she is a main character. As I was saying, she's been the main character of Resident Evil 1, 3, was very prominent in 5, and there was the main character of Revelations. A lot of people do associate Jill Valentine with Resident Evil, and of course vice versa, and I do have my suspicions that this movie might be a link to the next Resident Evil game, and it'll be a nice tie-in for Jill to jump back into the series. Of course that's assuming she has a main character or prominent side character role in the next Resident Evil game, which I definitely see being the case. I feel like they wouldn't be remaking all the old games and having a CG movie with all the mainline characters if they weren't setting up something for the next big Resident Evil game, where there's going to hopefully be a big crossover where we can actually play as the characters. Of course, seeing the CG movie is pretty solid fan service in itself, and it's kind of like an Avengers moment for us, but I am looking forward to seeing Jill return in a future Resident Evil game. Of course, as to what that will be, time will tell, because we haven't had much, if any, information as to what the next Resident Evil games will be now that Resident Evil 4 is released. Of course, there was a lot of talk about Resident Evil 4 leading up to its release, and of course during its release period, and now it's kind of started to settle, and hopefully we should start hearing more info about the next Resident Evil game. But as to where Jill has been, it is pretty simple. She's pretty much just been undergoing tests straight off the back of Resident Evil 5, and then it's probably just been keeping to herself since then. And of course Chris has kind of let her have her space, given the amount of trauma she went through and how much mental damage it's caused being under mind control, especially by Albert Wesker, who did so much damage to the world in general, and she probably puts a lot of that blame on herself, especially given how much she tries to do in terms of good things and stopping BOW events. The fact that she's caused so many of them hit her extremely harshly, so it's going to be very interesting to see the character dynamics between her and everyone else, as well as just expanding upon where she's been directly with the audience, so just so we're not having to read between the lines as to what's been happening. But with that said, guys, that does bring us to the end of this video. Be sure to drop a comment down below as to what you thought of the Death Island trailer, and also if I did miss anything as to where Jill has been and there's some vital information that I'm missing from any of the Resident Evil media, be sure to drop that down below as well, and I look forward to reading all of your comments. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy, it is extremely appreciated and helps the channel out a ton, and don't forget to subscribe for a lot more Resident Evil content. Be sure to join our Discord, link is at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.